Hi, this is an overview of BSCS Biology, Unit 1, Chapter 1, The Human Animal. My name is Johanna Waldman, and I teach biology at another course to college in BPS. So going back to the overview and the whole curriculum, Unit 1 is all about evolution. And then these are the three chapters. Chapter 1, which is the focus here, is the human animal, and it's all about getting students to think scientifically about what makes humans unique or similar to other species. The main standard covered is this one about the nervous system. So the activities and lessons that will be covered are these: How Different Are We? Primates Exploring Primates, Tony's Brain, Portraying Humankind, A Long Childhood, and then What Does It Mean to Be Human is actually the presenting of the Portraying Humankind projects. So how different are we? This is where you get to know what they think right now, your pre-assessment about how they think we're similar to or different from other species. I often give these questions from the text as the do now for students to do individually, and then they can get right into groups with their ideas to make a poster on chart paper about their ideas. They come up with a group list, so they have some time to think and debate in their small groups. It's important to remind them of what those discussions should be like and to be respectful of each other's ideas. From there, they do a gallery walk. Again, you'll need to set some ground rules, make sure they spread their posters out, you time how long they're at each poster, where what they're looking for are common themes around the room, characteristics that everyone agrees upon, and then I usually add in also what they see that might be unique to one group and why they think that might be. From there, you try to come up with a class list. So this is an actual class list from one of my classes a few years ago. I don't try to guide them or judge, so this is what the students came up with themselves. It can be very challenging to get to 6. Often we get 3 or 4 that everybody agrees upon, and then there's some others that have question marks, or some students might put on their own individual lists, but the whole class has trouble coming to consensus on a few if you have a really good debate and discussion going. The last part of this is called Chimps at Gombe. Students read a story that's an excerpt from Jane Goodall's diary and answer some questions. It's nice to also show a little video of Jane Goodall so they can see it. More and more my students have actually seen videos or read some of her work in middle school. The next activity is Primates Exploring Primates. It actually has a Part A and a Part B that are very different from one another, but they're both students observing firsthand some differences between humans and other species. So during Part A, Get a Grip, first they observe each other using their hands with different activities around the room. It's important to practice what is an observation, to not include your opinion or inferences, things like that, as they record. Then they watch a video. There's a video included with the textbook, or if you have one that shows different species of primates in their natural habitats, you can definitely go ahead and use that. I give them this chart as a guide or have them write it in their notebooks. Sometimes I add a third column for other interesting things that they note. They should be looking for this as they watch the video. Based on their observations, they're supposed to come up with wonderings and questions about how different primates use their hands and thumbs. And the goal is then to turn one of those into a testable questions, which they will use to run an experiment. This is really the first time that they're being asked to write a testable question. Many of them didn't have to do that to this extent in physics, and it is an important skill. It's one of the science practices that will be in the new math standards. So there's this need to know box in the textbook. It's important to go over it, probably have them take some notes in their notebook. Then in pairs, I have them try to come up with those testable questions, and we share some of them out and use the criteria checklist to decide if they're really testable. And as a class, write a sentence frame that could be a testable question for thinking about how humans use their opposable thumbs and how they do activities with and without them. Students then will actually run an activity. The way it's written in the textbook, they have to then use a protocol to write their own procedure, make their own data table. That's a lot of practices to include in one lesson. So especially for my inclusion classes, I give them a very general procedure. I actually let them choose what activity they think involves the opposable thumb that would be, you would see differences with and without it. And for my inclusion classes, I give them a data table. My honors class, I might have them come up with a data table themselves. I do find that even just making a data table is a skill that we need to work on. And so really the focus here is those testable questions. Here are some students in action. This pair decided to do making paper airplanes, and here you see tying shoes. It's important to give time for students to make sense of the data, have some discussion, have them write about their conclusions and what happened in the activity. The second part of this, Primates Exploring Primates, is all brains on board. So it's important to check that you actually have sheep brains at your school. You could have them do the lesson just from pictures, both in the textbook and the online slides. It's a different experience, though, when they can actually put their hands on the sheep brain. Make sure you do look at the slides in the teacher resource CD or the interactive video CD, as well as the ones in the textbook. I like to give my kids rulers to measure as well, and make sure that you preview the 2 essays that are related to this activity, the one on Phineas Gage and that talks about the 3 main parts of the brain. I tend to show a video of Phineas Gage also. The next activity or lesson is Tony's brain. And this one is getting students, again, to think about physically what the brain is, what happens. It opens with asking students to think about the difference between the mind and the brain. And then they go on to complete a series of steps. So first they read about Tony, a teenager, and he's been acting differently and what's going on, and they predict what they think is wrong. Then they're given more information from an interview. Then more information about different disorders. Then more information from an investigation of the doctor's results. And at each point, they go back and cross off things that no longer make sense and write about how the more evidence that they have, the better their explanation is. There's also some slides that show physically in the brain what is happening. Again, thinking about that mind-brain connection and how really are they different or not. Students will need some help making sense of these diagrams. This is a great place where I have students do a CER and actually introduce the rebuttal, because they actually had other ideas that might now be wrong, and they can give a reason for that. I give them sentence starters for these and really structure this. The next activity, Portraying Humankind, is actually introducing a project. That's the capstone chapter project, where they're answering that question, are humans more similar to or different from other species? So I give them project guidelines of what they need to do. I also give them a planning sheet. I find that to make sure they're doing everything the project asks, it's really helpful for them to plan it out. So what are the behaviors? What are the physiological characteristics that they are highlighting? What primate are they comparing it to? And then is that more similar to or different than other species? And it's really helpful if they choose an activity and base their whole project around that. So they need time to work on this. There's also 2 readings that go along with this. On Being Human, which helps provide some characteristics they could choose, and then Brains and a Lot of Nerve, which is all about neuron structure and neurotransmission. So you actually do need to do a lesson on that. I typically get the computers or the iPads and have students do an online animation so they can visualize what's happening in those neurons, and it's at the pretty basic level here. These are some sample projects. As I said, I have students choose. So one student chose cell phones or technology here. This is her main idea in the middle, the behavior she chose, the physiological characteristics. Softball. This one was about basketball. And these are posters, but I have students do all kinds of different things. A lot of them choose to just write a paper. I tell them they have to include pictures. I've gotten poems, videos, storybooks. They can do anything they want as long as it shows the behaviors and the physiological characteristics. The next and really the last lesson is Along Childhood, where students research an animal and different characteristics about childhood and gestation, and then they will share that information with some other students who researched other animals. So again, you'll need computers or iPads where they can do that research. And then there are some questions that ask them to look for patterns, to think about how length of pregnancy relates to dependence on mothers and brain development. And again, you'll need to support them getting to those conclusions and interpreting their data before they answer the questions. There's also an essay, The Importance of Being Children, that goes along with that. If you're short on time, you can give them data for 5 animals and have them just look for the patterns and answer the questions. And finally, what does it mean to be human? Is the presentation of